February 16th, 1942. The United States Army has a manpower crisis. It needs nearly 1 million more men for the largest mobilization in American history, and more than a third of every group of draftees is being turned away. Not for missing fingers, not for flat feet, for their eyes. That day, the Army officially lowered its vision standard, because without a small curved piece of glass, the country was about to run out of soldiers. This is the story of eyeglasses. It starts 700 years earlier, on an island where leaving without permission could get you killed. Long before anyone ground a lens, people were already cheating blurry eyesight with whatever clear material they could find. The Roman philosopher Seneca is said to have read manuscripts through a glass globe filled with water, using it like a crude magnifier. Emperor Nero reportedly watched gladiator fights through a polished emerald, though historians still debate whether that was for vision or simply for the tint. None of this was optics as a science. It was trial and error with whatever was transparent. The real turning point came from the Arab world. Around the year 1021, the scholar Ibn al-Haytham finished his book of optics, laying out for the first time how the human eye actually works and how curved glass bends light. When his work was translated into Latin in 1240, it landed in the hands of European monasteries, where aging monks had a very specific, very unglamorous problem. They could no longer read the manuscripts they had spent their lives copying. Monks began laying polished crystal or beryl stones directly onto pages, letting the curve of the stone enlarge the letters underneath. These were called reading stones, and they saved the eyesight of an entire generation of scribes without anyone involved understanding the physics of why they worked. The English friar Roger Bacon described the effect in his 1267 writings, noting that letters looked larger and clearer through a certain kind of glass. He had no word for refraction. He used it anyway. The leap from a stone you lay on a page to a lens you wear on your face happened in northern Italy, most historians agree, sometime in the 1280s. The exact inventor is one of history's genuine mysteries. A friar named Alessandro della Spina of Pisa is credited with sharing the design freely, after another unnamed craftsman kept it secret. A supposed inventor named Salvino d'Armati even has a monument in Florence crediting him with the breakthrough, but modern historians are skeptical he ever existed at all. The earliest solid documentary evidence is a 1289 reference and a 1306 sermon by a Dominican friar in Florence, who told his congregation that spectacles were less than 20 years old, and that he had personally met the man who first made them. Whoever he was, his solution was almost embarrassingly simple. 2 convex lenses, riveted together at the handle, balanced directly on the bridge of the nose with no arms, no hinges, nothing hooking over the ears. You held your head very still and hoped they didn't slide off. It was clumsy. It also worked. And it worked because of a material only one place on Earth could reliably produce. That place was Murano, a small island just north of Venice. By the late 13th century, Murano was the only workshop in Europe capable of producing the clear, colorless glass needed for a usable lens. Ordinary glass of the period was cloudy, greenish, full of bubbles. Murano's glassmakers, known as cristalleri, had cracked the formula for a pure, almost invisible glass called cristallo, and they guarded it like a state secret, because it effectively was one. The Venetian government moved glassmaking to Murano in 1291, officially to reduce fire risk in the crowded city, but the side effect was total control. Cristalleri were forbidden from leaving the island without government permission. Their formulas were classified. Historical accounts describe glassmakers who defected to sell their secrets abroad being hunted down, and in the more extreme retellings, executed for it. Whether every one of those stories is literally true is disputed by historians, but the fact that the threat existed at all tells you everything about how valuable this monopoly was. For roughly 2 centuries, if you wanted a clear lens anywhere in the known world, the raw material for it had passed through Murano's furnaces. Venice didn't just make glass. It made the ability to see clearly a controlled export, the same way another country might control oil or grain. Merchants, monks, and scholars across Europe all depended on one small island's willingness to sell. That is an extraordinary amount of leverage to hold over something as basic as reading a book. Eyeglasses didn't stay Italian for long. As Venetian trade routes stretched across the Mediterranean and beyond, spectacles rode along as a minor commodity tucked in with silk, spices, and glassware. Marco Polo, writing about his travels in China in the 1270s, described seeing people there using devices to aid their reading, though scholars still argue over whether these were true lenses or an older form of Chinese eye protection. Centuries later, Spanish and Italian Catholic missionaries carried European-style spectacles directly into Ming Dynasty China, where wealthy scholars and officials adopted them almost immediately as a mark of status and learning. Here's the detail that shows how fast small choices snowball into permanent change. European frames used silk ribbons or string looped over the ears to hold the lenses in place. Chinese craftsmen looked at the same problem and solved it completely differently, attaching small weights to the strings instead, letting gravity hold the glasses steady on the nose without any pressure on the ears at all. That decision seemed small at the time. It wasn't. It shows that the moment eyeglasses crossed a cultural border, they stopped being one invention and became dozens of parallel ones, each region engineering its own answer to the same basic problem of keeping glass in front of your eyes. By the 1500s, Chinese eyewear had developed independently to the point that some Ming scholars, examining Western spectacles brought by traders, assumed the design must have originated in China first. It's a small irony sitting at the center of this whole story, an invention nobody can definitively credit to one country, moving quietly across 3 continents, absorbed and reshaped by each one, long before anyone thought to write down exactly who did what first. You would think something this useful would be universally welcomed. It wasn't. For centuries, wearing glasses in public carried real social risk, and the reaction split almost entirely along lines of national pride and vanity. In France, glasses were treated as a visible confession of weakness. There was a popular 18th century saying that translated roughly to "hello glasses, goodbye girls," meaning a man who put spectacles on had just announced himself as old, frail, and unmarriageable. King Louis XVI was severely nearsighted for his entire life and refused, point blank, to wear corrective lenses in public. Napoleon Bonaparte went to great lengths to avoid ever being seen wearing his. Portraits from the era show a strange pattern. Scholars and clergy are painted with glasses to signal wisdom, while vain noblemen are conspicuously painted without them, even when historians know for a fact they needed them. Spain took the opposite approach entirely, starting in the 16th century because a pair of quality spectacles was so expensive. Wearing them in Spanish court became a flex, a visible announcement of wealth and importance. Some Spanish noblemen reportedly wore glasses with plain, non-prescription glass, purely for the appearance of status, whether or not they needed vision correction at all. Underneath the fashion politics sat something darker. Across much of Europe, glasses were quietly described as a badge of infirmity, a visible sign that your body had failed you. People who needed them were viewed as dependent, diminished, less capable. This is the part that should feel strange, given everything you now know about what this object actually does for a person's ability to function. The tool that let millions keep reading, keep working, keep contributing, was treated for hundreds of years as a mark of shame rather than a mark of adaptation. That tension between usefulness and stigma never fully disappeared. It just changed shape. 2 things broke eyeglasses out of luxury item obscurity and into mass necessity, and they happened almost exactly 200 years apart. The first was Johannes Gutenberg's printing press, arriving around 1440. Before Gutenberg, books were hand-copied, scarce, and absurdly expensive, so the population that even needed reading glasses was tiny. Monks, clergy, a handful of scholars. The printing press changed the math instantly. Suddenly, there were affordable books everywhere, and with them, a much larger population straining their eyes over small printed type for the first time in their lives. Demand for spectacles surged so sharply that by the early 1500s, peddlers in Nuremberg, Germany, were walking city streets with baskets of ready-made glasses, letting customers try on pair after pair until something worked well enough. Mass production had begun, and with it, falling prices, cruder metal frames, and glasses moving from a monk's tool to a merchant's necessity. The second breakthrough came from a founding father with a very specific dinner table problem. By the 1780s, Benjamin Franklin was elderly, serving as a diplomat in Paris, and dealing with both nearsightedness and farsightedness at once. He needed one pair of glasses to see his food, and a completely different pair to read the expressions on the faces of the French officials across the table. And he was tired of swapping them constantly. So around 1784, Franklin had an optician cut both sets of lenses in half and fuse the halves into a single frame, distance correction on top, reading correction on the bottom. He called them double spectacles. History remembers them as bifocals, and he never patented a single detail of the design, choosing instead to let anyone copy it freely. Between a German street peddler's basket and an aging diplomat's dinner table, eyeglasses had quietly finished their transformation. What began as a secret formula on a guarded island had become an object any tradesman, farmer, or shopkeeper could plausibly afford and use for the rest of a working life. If you're finding this history as strange as I am, subscribe to the channel. Common Lore digs up stories like this every week, and what comes next, when a piece of curved glass starts quietly reshaping entire economies, is even bigger. Once glasses became affordable, their effect on the wider world showed up in places nobody was tracking at the time. The printing press had already flooded Europe with pamphlets, religious tracts, and translated Bibles. Eyeglasses were what let the growing population of aging clergy, scholars, and eventually ordinary literate citizens actually keep reading all of it, well past the age when their natural eyesight would have forced them to stop. That matters more than it sounds. Martin Luther's ideas spread through pamphlets during the Protestant Reformation, partly because there was now a critical mass of readers, across every age group, capable of reading fine print for decades of their adult lives, instead of going effectively blind to text in their 40s. The scientific revolution that followed depended on scholars like astronomers and physicians being able to keep working with instruments and texts well into old age, using bifocal and presbyopic corrections that simply didn't exist a few centuries earlier. None of this means glasses single-handedly caused the Reformation or modern science. It means an entire category of intellectual life, previously cut short by age-related vision loss, kept running for decades longer than it otherwise would have. There's a quieter, more human version of this same effect happening globally right now, and it's arguably the most direct proof of the promise in this video's title. Researchers running controlled studies in Bangladesh gave reading glasses to adults over 50 working as farmers, weavers, and food sellers. People whose presbyopia was already cutting into their ability to do fine detail work. Within months, average income for that group rose by roughly 38%. A separate study among tea pickers in Assam, India, whose pay depends entirely on how quickly and accurately they can pick leaves by hand, found productivity jumped by 21% after they received glasses. One research estimate puts the return at roughly $46 in additional income for every single dollar spent providing someone with reading glasses. That's not a modest social program. Economists studying global health interventions have called it one of the best buys in the entire field. From a monopoly on one Venetian island to a global necessity took roughly 700 years. Today, the scale is almost impossible to picture. A single company, EssilorLuxottica, formed from the 2018 merger of the world's largest lens maker and largest eyewear maker, now produces more than 1 billion pairs of glasses and lenses every year, operates over 17,000 stores worldwide, and owns brands from Ray-Ban and Oakley to Purcell and Vogue eyewear, alongside its own vision insurance company. It reported over 26 billion euros in revenue in 2024. A frame that costs somewhere between $4 and $15 to manufacture routinely retails for well over $200, and this single company touches an estimated quarter of the entire global eyewear market. The demand behind that empire is only growing. Roughly 2.6 billion people worldwide currently need vision correction, and researchers project that by 2050, nearly half the planet, close to 5 billion people, will be nearsighted, driven by a combination of more time spent indoors and more time spent focused on screens at close range. The World Health Organization estimates the annual global economic cost of untreated vision impairment at over $400 billion, almost entirely in lost productivity, which loops directly back to that Bangladesh and Assam data from a moment ago. And here's the part that pega as pessoas de surpresa. that catches people off guard. Eyeglasses are quietly becoming a computing platform. Ray-Ban Meta Smart Glasses, a joint product between EssilorLuxottica and Meta, have already sold more than 2 million pairs. Built with cameras and AI assistants embedded directly into ordinary-looking frames. Meta has reportedly invested billions of dollars for a small equity stake in the same company that descended from that secretive Venetian glass guild. The object that once required government permission just to leave an island is now, 7 centuries later, one of the primary devices tech companies are betting will replace the smartphone on your face. Back to February 1942. The army lowers its vision standard, and hundreds of thousands of men march off to war wearing government-issued glasses, seeing clearly enough to fight only because of a technology invented by an anonymous Italian craftsman 6.5 centuries earlier, who wanted to keep his own method secret. It was hidden by its own inventor. It was banned from noble portraits out of vanity. It was a capital punishment monopoly on one small island. It decided who could serve in the largest war in human history. It's quietly adding tens of billions of dollars in recovered income to some of the poorest workers on Earth right now, this year, through nothing more complicated than a curved piece of ground glass. It's probably on your face, your nightstand, or in your pocket at this exact moment. Take a second and think about that. The object correcting your vision right now carries 700 years of secrecy, shame, war, and quiet global transformation folded into 2 small lenses and a bridge over your nose. Power, it turns out, doesn't always look like an army or a currency. Sometimes it looks like the simple ability to keep reading past the age your own eyes were built to allow. If this story surprised you, subscribe to Common Law and tell us in the comments which part of the Eyeglasses story caught you off guard the most. And drop a like so more people can find this video too.